$30,000. That's what I handed over on a Tuesday afternoon in March in the form of a cashier's check to a man named Russell Kane, a man with a company called Kane & Sons Restoration, a man with a truck that had a magnetic sign on the door, a laminated license he showed me at my kitchen table, and a smile that made my late husband's sister say, "Now that's a man who knows what he's doing." He was supposed to rebuild my fire-damaged garage and rear addition, framing, electrical, drywall, roofing, a full restoration. He took my deposit on a Tuesday. He broke ground exactly never. For 4 months, I got texts. Permits are backed up. Supplier issue with the lumber. My guy's out sick. We'll be there next week. Every excuse sounded reasonable. Every excuse was a lie.
By the time I understood what had actually happened to me, Russell Kane had done this to at least 11 other homeowners in 3 counties, combined losses north of $340,000. Some of those people were rebuilding after house fires. One was a 74-year-old widower rebuilding after a tree came through his roof. Russell Kane took from people at the exact moment they were most vulnerable, most desperate, and most trusting. He thought he'd built a system, fake reviews, shell LLCs, a revolving door of new companies every time one got a bad reputation. He thought the deposits were free money because homeowners don't sue over $20,000 or $30,000. The legal fees eat the recovery, so why bother? He was wrong about me. This is the story of how I got every single dollar back, and how Russell Kane, contractor, conman, and eventually convicted felon, ended up standing in a courtroom listening to a judge read out restitution numbers with his own name attached to them. They thought they got away with it. They were wrong.
Before I get into it, if you're new here, this channel is dedicated to true financial revenge stories. Real people who got scammed, defrauded, or robbed by someone who thought they'd never get caught, and who fought back methodically until every dollar came home and the person responsible faced real consequences. Today's story is about greed, betrayal, and getting every single dollar back. It's got fake business licenses, a small army of other victims I had to track down myself, a forensic accountant, a folder of subpoenaed bank records, and a moment in a courtroom I will never forget as long as I live. If you believe people who do this to homeowners, especially homeowners rebuilding after disasters, hit subscribe because we've got a lot of ground to cover today. This is a long one. Settle in. Let's go back to the beginning, to the fire. I need to tell you about the fire first because you can't understand how I ended up trusting Russell Kane without understanding how much of my judgment burned down along with my garage. It was a Sunday night in January. An electrical fault in the wiring behind our garage wall, old aluminum wiring from a renovation done decades before we bought the house, sparked, smoldered for hours inside the wall cavity, and then broke into open flame around 2 a.m. The fire department got there in 11 minutes. My husband, Tom, and I got out fine. Our dog got out fine. The garage did not. Neither did the mudroom addition behind it, or about a third of our roofline. Insurance covered a good chunk of it. Tom and I had been diligent about our homeowner's policy, thank God. But even with a solid claim, there's a gap. There's always a gap. Our payout was $94,000. The contractor bids I eventually got, once I understood what real rebuild costs looked like, ranged from $118,000 to $151,000. That gap, plus the emotional exhaustion of watching part of your house turn to ash, is exactly the soil scammers like Russell Kane plant themselves in. I want to be really specific about the vulnerability here, because I think a lot of people watching this have been through something similar and blame themselves more than they should. When your house catches fire, you are not thinking clearly for months. You are thinking about smoke smell in your clothes. You are thinking about whether your daughter's soccer trophies survived. You are exhausted from calling insurance adjusters and repeating the same facts over and over. You are, in short, exactly the kind of person who wants someone, anyone, to walk in, look competent, and say, "I'll handle it." Russell Kane said, "I'll handle it" beautifully. I found him through a Facebook group for our town, one of those local recommendations groups where people ask for plumbers and painters. I posted asking for restoration contractor recommendations after a fire. Within 4 hours, I had 3 names. Russell Kane's name came up twice, both times with glowing comments. He redid my whole basement after the flood, fast and fair priced, and Kane and Sons saved us. Hire him. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Both of those accounts were fake. Not entirely fake. They were real Facebook profiles, but they belonged to people who either didn't exist as described or who had been paid $50 in cash to post a nice comment about a company they'd never actually hired. This is a real, documented tactic, and it is disturbingly cheap and easy to execute. Russell Kane ran this exact play in at least 4 different town Facebook groups across 2 counties. I called him on a Tuesday. He picked up on the second ring, which felt like a good sign. How many contractors actually answer their phone? He was warm. He asked about the fire before he asked about the job, which felt human. He said, "Losing part of your house is traumatic, even if nobody got hurt. I've done a lot of fire restorations. I know how to make this less painful for you."
He came to look at the property 2 days later. He arrived in a white pickup truck with a magnetic sign on the door reading Kane and Sons Restoration, licensed and insured, serving the Tri-County area since 2009. He wore a company polo shirt, khakis, work boots that had actual wear on them. He walked the damage with a contractor's flashlight and a little notepad, tapping at the charred studs, checking the roofline from a ladder he pulled off his own truck. He said things that sounded like expertise. "You've got smoke migration into that back bedroom wall. You're going to want to test for that, even if the paint looks fine." He talked about load-bearing considerations on the garage rebuild. He mentioned needing to pull permits from the town before framing could start. And here's red flag number 1, which I want every viewer to actually write down. He never showed me a physical license card. He said the words licensed and insured probably 6 times in that first meeting. He never once produced a license number. I didn't ask. Why would I ask? He said the magic words. In my exhausted, fire-adjacent, grief-fogged brain, licensed and insured was a password that unlocked trust, not a claim that required verification. At my kitchen table over coffee, he wrote up an estimate on company letterhead, $132,000 for full garage and rear addition rebuild, including electrical, framing, roofing, drywall, and interior finish work. He said his standard practice, for a job this size, especially with fire damage requiring specialized materials, was a 25% deposit to secure the permits, order materials, and get on his schedule. 25% of $132,000 is $33,000. We eventually negotiated a bit, and he said he'd do the deposit at $30,000 flat, as a courtesy since you're rebuilding after a fire and I want to make this easier on you. I want to flag red flag number 2 here, and it's one of the most important lessons in this whole story. Legitimate contractors, in the vast majority of states, are legally restricted in how much deposit they can request up front. In many states, deposit caps exist specifically to prevent exactly what happened to me: a homeowner handing over a huge chunk of a project's total cost before a single nail is hammered. Some states cap deposits at 10%. Some cap them at a flat dollar amount, like $1,000 or $1,500, regardless of project size, unless the money goes into an escrow account. A 25% upfront ask without any escrow structure, without a payment schedule tied to completed work phases, is one of the single biggest warning signs in residential contracting. I did not know this. Tom didn't know this either. We were two grieving, exhausted homeowners who thought a big deposit was just how contracting worked, because we'd never done a project this large before.
Red flag number 3. Kane pushed urgency. Materials for fire restoration jobs are getting harder to source with lead times what they are right now, and my crew's booking up for spring. If you want to be on my March schedule, I'd need the deposit by end of week. Scarcity and urgency are the oldest tools in the manipulation toolbox, financial or otherwise, and I fell for it completely. Because I wanted my house rebuilt and I wanted the fire behind us. Red flag number 4, which I only understood in hindsight. Kane and Sons Restoration had no permanent office address. When I asked, casually, where his office was, he said, "We're mostly mobile, we do site visits, but our home base is over off Route 9. He never gave a street address. I never asked for one. Why would I? He had a truck, he had a polo shirt, he had references, or what I thought were references. We signed a contract, his contract, on his letterhead, with vague in hindsight language about commencement of work upon receipt of deposit and permit approval, no specific start date locked to a calendar date, and a payment schedule that was really just 2 lines, deposit now, remainder due upon substantial completion. No milestone payments, no holdback clause, no specific completion date with penalties for delay. On a Tuesday in early March, I handed Russell Kane a cashier's check for $30,000. He texted that evening, "Got it, thank you. Filing for permits this week. We'll keep you posted." I remember feeling relieved. I remember telling my sister-in-law, "We found a great guy. He's already filing permits." I remember, God help me, feeling grateful. That was the last competent professional communication I ever received from Russell Kane. The first excuse came 12 days later. Permit office is backed up. Town's dealing with staffing issues. Should have approval by end of month. Reasonable. Town permit offices really are slow sometimes. I said okay. 3 weeks after that, lumber supplier had a delay, some kind of regional shortage, pushing us back about 2 weeks. Also reasonable sounding. This was a period when construction material costs and supply chains were genuinely still recovering from broader disruptions, and every homeowner in America had heard a story about lumber shortages. Kane knew this. He was surfing a wave of plausible deniability that the broader economy had built for him. 6 weeks in, I started asking for specifics. "Can I get a copy of the permit application?" His response, "Sure, I'll grab that from my office and send it over. Been buried this week." I never got it. 8 weeks in, I asked if we could set a firm start date. He said, "Absolutely, let's target the 15th. The 15th came and went. No truck in my driveway, no call. I texted. Nothing for 2 days. Then, "So sorry, my guy's kid ended up in the hospital. We'll regroup next week." And that's when I found the smoking gun, or the first one anyway, because this story has more than one. I decided, after 10 weeks of excuses, to call the town permit office myself and just ask directly whether an application had been filed under Kane and Sons Restoration for my address. The woman on the phone put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she said, "I don't see any application filed under that business name or for that address for any date this year. No permit, ever, filed." He had told me explicitly on multiple occasions over multiple weeks that he was working on permits that simply did not exist as a filed application. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd handed him that cashier's check, and I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't quite panic yet. It was the cold, clarifying feeling of a puzzle piece snapping into place where you didn't want it to fit. I called Kane immediately. He picked up, which in hindsight tells you something about the stage of the con he was at. He still needed to manage me, not yet avoid me. "Oh, that's strange," he said. "Let me call the office. Sometimes there's a lag in their system before it shows up searchable." He said he'd call me back within the hour. He did not call me back within the hour. He called me back 4 days later and said, "Okay, so it turns out my office manager submitted it under our old business name, Kane Restoration Group, not Kane & Sons. I'm so sorry. That's on us. I'll get it sorted." I called the permit office again and asked them to check under Kane Restoration Group. Nothing. I asked if they had any record under any name of a Russell Kane filing anything, ever, in the past 3 years. Nothing. That was the moment I stopped being a trusting homeowner and started being something else. I didn't have a word for it yet. Looking back, I'd call it a detective. Over the following 2 weeks, I did what I now understand is the first rule of financial self-defense. I started building a written record of everything in real time, instead of just having phone conversations that left no trail. I switched every future communication with Kane to text and email, specifically so there would be a time-stamped record. When he tried to call, I'd text back, "Can you put that in writing so I have it for my records?" This single habit, forcing communication into writing, turned out to be one of the most valuable things I did in this entire ordeal, because it built the evidentiary spine of the eventual criminal case.
I asked for his contractor's license number directly, in writing, for my insurance file. He sent back a string of numbers. I looked up my state's contractor licensing board website and searched it. The license number he gave me did not exist in their database. Not expired, not suspended, non-existent, never issued to anyone, let alone Russell Kane. I want to sit on that for a second, because I think it's the most important single fact in this entire first half of the story. Russell Kane was never a licensed contractor. Not once, not ever. Everything about the polo shirt, the truck signage, the confident talk about load-bearing walls and smoke migration, every bit of professional-sounding competence was theater, built on top of zero legal authorization to do the work he was contracted and paid to do. I called my insurance agent to ask what our options were, since technically our claim payout had already been partially dispersed based on us having hired a contractor. My agent said something that made my stomach drop further. "You should also check whether he's even insured, because if he's not licensed, there's a good chance the insurance he claims is fake too." I asked Kane in writing for his certificate of general liability insurance and workers' comp coverage. Standard, reasonable documentation any legitimate contractor should have on hand instantly. He sent me a PDF. I called the insurance broker listed on the certificate. They had no record of ever issuing a policy to Kane & Sons Restoration or to Russell Kane under any policy number. The certificate was fabricated, probably using a template and a real broker's logo pulled off the internet. By this point, I had been in contract with Kane for roughly 4 months. No permit, no license, no real insurance, no work started, not one board removed, not one nail pulled from the fire-damaged framing, nothing, and $30,000 of my rebuild money sitting in whatever account Russell Kane had deposited that cashier's check into. I confronted him directly by text, laying out everything I'd discovered. No permit filed under any name, no valid license number, fabricated insurance certificate. I asked for a full refund within 7 days, or I would be contacting an attorney and the state licensing board. His response, which I still have saved, was this: "I think there's been some confusion, and I don't appreciate the accusatory tone. I've been dealing with a lot personally, and I'm doing my best to get your project moving. I'll be in touch soon with an update." He never contacted me again. 4 days later, his phone number was disconnected. His Kane and Sons Restoration Facebook page, the one with all those glowing testimonials, disappeared entirely, vanished, gone, along with every comment, every review, every trace. That's when the full scale of what had happened actually hit me. Not just the money, though $30,000 is not nothing. It's a year of careful saving for a lot of families. It was for us. It was the fact that our garage and back addition were still sitting there, charred and open to the weather 4 months after the fire, no closer to being rebuilt than the night it burned. It was realizing that every update I'd received for 4 months had been a deliberately constructed lie, engineered specifically to keep me calm and non-litigious for as long as possible while he moved on to his next target. Because that's the other thing I learned in this period. I was not his only victim, not even close. I started searching, obsessively in the evenings after Tom went to bed, for any trace of Kane and Sons Restoration, or Russell Kane, or Kane Restoration Group, anywhere online. I found a defunct Yelp listing, since taken down, with 2 old reviews that hadn't been scrubbed as fast as the Facebook page. One from a woman describing almost exactly what had happened to me: fire damage, a deposit, months of excuses, and one 1-star review, 3 sentences long, that just said, "Took our money, never came back, filed a police report." A police report. Someone else had already gone to law enforcement. I remember sitting at my laptop at 11 at night, reading that review 3 or 4 times, feeling something that was almost relief mixed in with the fury. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't some unique bad luck, that there was a pattern here, a documented pattern, and patterns can be proven. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to try to get my $30,000 back through some individual small claims filing that might net me a worthless judgment against a man who'd disappear before I could collect. I was going to find every other person Russell Kane had done this to, build a complete picture of the scheme, and take it to people who could actually put him away. The police, the state licensing board, the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and eventually a lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of fraud. I had no idea that night just how big this was about to get. The next morning, I filed a police report. This sounds like a small, obvious step, and it is, but I want to emphasize it because so many fraud victims skip it, either out of embarrassment or because they assume the police won't do anything about a contract dispute. Here's the thing: what Kane did wasn't a contract dispute. Taking a deposit under false pretenses, a fake license, fabricated insurance, no intention of performing the work, crosses the line from civil breach of contract into criminal theft by deception, and, depending on jurisdiction, could implicate home improvement fraud statutes that many states have specifically on the books because this exact scheme is so common. The detective who took my report, Detective Reyes, actually recognized the name Russell Kane before I'd finished explaining. "We've had a couple of calls about a contractor matching that description," he said. "Different business name each time, though. You said Kane and Sons?" He pulled up something on his computer, nodded slowly, and said, "Yeah, we've got an open file. I'm going to want everything you have, every text, every email, the contract, the cashier's check receipt, all of it." That was the moment I understood I wasn't starting an investigation from zero. I was joining one already in progress, and that meant my documentation could actually connect dots the police hadn't been able to connect yet, because victims who'd reported before me might not have kept records as thorough as mine. I spent the next week assembling what I started calling the file, a physical binder and a mirrored digital folder containing the signed contract with Kane and Sons Restoration, dated and itemized at $132,000, with the $30,000 deposit line clearly marked.
the cashier's check receipt from my bank showing the exact date, amount, and payee. Every single text message exchange exported and printed with timestamps intact. Every email, particularly the fabricated insurance certificate and the fake license number he'd sent me in writing. A timeline document I built myself, month by month, cross-referencing his excuses against the actual dates I confirmed no permit had ever been filed, and screenshots of the now deleted Facebook page and reviews, which I'd thankfully saved before they vanished, plus the archived Yelp review mentioning a prior police report. Detective Reyes told me something that stuck with me. In these home improvement fraud cases, the biggest thing that kills prosecutions is victims who don't keep paper trails and can't remember specific dates. You've basically built us half the case file already. That single sentence told me my instinct to switch everything to writing months earlier hadn't just protected me emotionally, it had become genuinely useful evidence. And that's when I found the next smoking gun. While digging through my bank records to pull the exact cashier's check details for the police file, I called my bank and asked whether they could tell me anything about the account the check had been deposited into, since a cashier's check clears through the banking system and leaves a trail. My bank couldn't give me the receiving account details directly, that's protected information, but they confirmed the check had cleared and gave me the clearing bank's name. I passed this directly to Detective Reyes, who was able to use it, alongside similar information from other victims, to subpoena the actual account records. Here's where the investigation started moving from one homeowner's bad experience to a documented pattern of criminal fraud. Detective Reyes told me in a follow-up call 3 weeks later that they'd identified at least 7 other victims using variations of the business name: Kane & Sons Restoration, Kane Restoration Group, Kane Brothers Construction, and one calling itself simply KRG Contracting, all traced back to deposits into accounts controlled by the same man, Russell Kane, sometimes using slightly different spellings or middle initials. 7 other victims. I want you to sit with that number because it kept growing. I decided I wasn't content to wait passively for the police investigation to run its course, especially because Detective Reyes was honest with me that fraud cases like this, spread across jurisdictions and involving shell business names, can take a long time and sometimes stall for lack of resources. So I did something that turned out to be pivotal. I went public, carefully and factually, on the same local Facebook groups where Kane had originally built his fake reputation. I wrote a post, not an angry rant, but a factual, dated timeline, screenshot supported, laying out exactly what had happened: the deposit, the fake permit claims, the fabricated license number, the fabricated insurance certificate, and a direct ask: if you or someone you know hired Kane & Sons Restoration, Kane Restoration Group, or KRG Contracting and lost money, please message me. I am working with local police and an attorney to document a pattern of fraud. Within 48 hours, I had 11 direct messages. By the end of that first week, I had contact from 4 additional victims who hadn't yet gone to police, plus 2 people who'd almost hired him and backed out after noticing some of the same red flags I'd documented: no license verification, a big upfront deposit, urgency pressure. I started compiling victim statements myself, essentially building an informal master file that I eventually handed over in full to Detective Reyes and to a consumer protection attorney I retained named Marisol Fenn. Combined losses, once I'd cataloged every victim who came forward, totaled $341,600 across 11 households. One woman, rebuilding a kitchen after a burst pipe flooded her first floor, had given him $18,000. A retired school teacher named Harold, rebuilding his roof after storm damage, had given him $22,000, and at 74 years old, told me on the phone, voice shaking, "I thought I did everything right. I checked his reviews." His reviews, the fake ones. the ones Kane had paid strangers $50 to post. Marisol Fenn, my attorney, explained the strategy clearly during our first consultation. Given the number of victims and the amount involved, this had crossed a threshold where criminal prosecution, not just a civil lawsuit, was realistic and appropriate, and that a criminal conviction plus a court-ordered restitution order was actually a stronger path to recovering my money than a standalone civil suit against a man who likely had no visible assets in his own name. Here's the problem with civil suits against guys like this, she told me. You win a judgment and then you spend years trying to collect on it because he's hidden everything or he simply doesn't have anything left. A criminal restitution order tied to a conviction comes with actual enforcement teeth, wage garnishment, asset seizure, probation conditions requiring payment. We want the DA's office fully weaponized on this.
So that became the strategy. Keep building the pattern. Keep feeding Detective Reyes and the DA's office everything the growing group of victims had, and let the sheer scale of the fraud force serious prosecution rather than a slap on the wrist. Around this time, I also filed a formal complaint with our state's Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and separately with the Contractor's State License Board, since operating without a license while claiming to be licensed is its own specific violation, often carrying civil penalties independent of any criminal case. I want to flag this for anyone watching who's dealing with something similar. You should file in every channel simultaneously: police report, licensing board complaint, Attorney General Consumer Protection Complaint, and Better Business Bureau, because each of these creates a separate paper trail, and sometimes one agency moves faster than another, or one agency's file ends up feeding evidence into a different agency's case. The licensing board complaint turned out to matter more than I expected. Their investigator confirmed, in writing, that no license had ever been issued to Russell Kane under any business name in our state ever. That single document, an official state licensing board confirmation of zero licensure, became one of the cleanest, most damning pieces of evidence in the entire case, because it wasn't just victim testimony, it was an unimpeachable government record proving Kane had never had legal standing to perform contracting work at all. Meanwhile, our growing informal victim network, by this point we had a private group chat, 9 of us, sharing updates, turned up something none of us expected. Kane hadn't fled the state or gone underground. He had simply started a new business under yet another name, Northridge Restoration Solutions, and was actively soliciting new customers in a county about 45 minutes away, using, we quickly discovered, recycled marketing photos from a legitimate restoration company's website and a brand new set of fake Facebook reviews. This was the near-miss moment. Kane was actively, at that very moment, in the process of taking a deposit from a new victim, a young couple rebuilding after basement flooding, roughly $24,000, and if we hadn't caught it, he would have added a 12th victim to the list while his existing criminal case was still crawling through the early investigative stage. One of the women in our victim group chat, Priscilla, spotted a Northridge Restoration Solutions ad in a different town's community Facebook group, recognized Kane's face in a Meet the Owner photo despite the different business name, and immediately alerted the rest of us. We moved fast. I called Detective Reyes that same evening. He told me the case had, by then, been escalated to involve the county DA's Economic Crimes Unit, and that this new information, an active, ongoing solicitation under a new alias, potentially in progress against a new victim, was exactly the kind of urgency that could accelerate an arrest. Separately, and I want to be careful how I frame this because I'm not a lawyer, I want to be clear this is not a recommendation, but it's what actually happened. Priscilla reached out directly to the young couple who appeared to be in the process of being solicited by Northridge Restoration Solutions, having found their public inquiry comment on the ad. She warned them, with documentation, before they handed over a dime. They never paid the deposit.
12th victim averted. That near miss lit a fire under the investigation. Within 3 weeks, an arrest warrant was issued for Russell Kane on multiple counts, including theft by deception, and because of the volume and pattern involved, the case was elevated to a felony-level charge given the aggregate amount stolen far exceeded the felony threshold in our state. Russell Kane was arrested at a gas station in the neighboring county, driving the same white pickup truck, now with a magnetic Northridge Restoration Solutions sign covering the old one. Detective Reyes called me personally to let me know. I remember exactly where I was standing in my kitchen, the same table where I'd handed him that cashier's check almost 7 months earlier. I didn't feel triumphant yet. I felt something closer to disbelief, and underneath that, a cautious, still-forming hope that maybe, actually, this was going to end the way it was supposed to.
The criminal case against Russell Kane moved forward on multiple felony counts of theft by deception and operating as an unlicensed contractor, consolidated across the 11 documented victims from Kane & Sons, Kane Restoration Group, and KRG Contracting, plus the attempted 12th case involving Northridge Restoration Solutions that never resulted in an actual payment but was cited as evidence of ongoing intent and pattern. The DA's Economic Crimes Unit built the case almost entirely on the documentary trail our victim group and I had assembled: contracts, texts, emails, the fabricated license number cross-referenced against the state licensing board's official zero-record confirmation, the fabricated insurance certificate cross-referenced against the broker's confirmation that no such policy existed, and bank records, obtained through subpoena, tracing the deposited funds. This is where the forensic accounting piece became genuinely fascinating and honestly deeply satisfying to watch unfold. The forensic accountant working with the DA's office traced the flow of victim deposits through Kane's various business accounts, contrary to what a lot of people assume, that a scammer like this either blows the money on luxury items or squirrels it away somewhere clever. The reality was almost mundane and, in its own way, more infuriating. And that's when I found the last smoking gun, the one that answered the question I'd been asking for a year. What did he actually do with my money? The forensic accounting showed that the overwhelming majority of the stolen deposits, including my $30,000, had gone toward exactly 2 things: personal credit card debt from a previous failed business venture, an actual legitimate contracting business Kane had run years earlier, which had gone under after he mismanaged it into bankruptcy, and ongoing personal living expenses, including his own home mortgage payments, car payments, and what the accounting described, almost comically, as recreational expenditures, meaning a boat slip rental and a series of payments to a fantasy sports betting platform. There was no criminal mastermind hiding a fortune in an offshore account. There was a man who had failed at legitimate contracting once, discovered that lying was easier and more profitable than building a real business, and used a rotating cast of fake identities to keep the scheme alive just long enough to fund an ordinary, unremarkable life: a mortgage, a car payment, a boat he barely used, and sports betting losses. Somehow, that mundane truth made it worse for me, not better. My $30,000, money we'd carefully saved, money tied to insurance proceeds from watching part of our house burn, didn't go toward some elaborate criminal empire. It went toward propping up Russell Kane's completely ordinary lifestyle, while my garage sat open to the elements for a year. The case went to trial. Kane's attorney pushed for trial rather than a plea deal initially, apparently gambling that individual victims wouldn't hold up well under cross-examination, or that the pattern evidence wouldn't be admissible in full. That gamble did not pay off.
With 11 documented victims, consistent patterns across every case, the fake license, the fabricated insurance, the escalating excuses, the vanished business names, and the ironclad official documentation from the state licensing board and insurance broker confirming his credentials were entirely fabricated, the prosecution's case was, in Marisol Fenn's words, about as clean as economic crimes cases get. I testified. I'm not going to pretend that was easy. Sitting across a courtroom from the man who took $30,000 from us and let our garage rot for a year, describing under oath exactly how it happened, was one of the harder things I've done. But I also want to tell you it was one of the most quietly powerful things I've done, because for the first time in over a year, I wasn't the one explaining myself, apologizing, or wondering if I'd been foolish. He was. Russell Kane was convicted on multiple felony counts. At sentencing, the judge specifically addressed the pattern of targeting vulnerable homeowners, several rebuilding after fires, floods, and storm damage, as an aggravating factor. He was sentenced to a period of incarceration followed by an extended probation term, and critically for me and the other victims, the court issued a restitution order requiring Kane to repay the full $341,600 in documented losses across all 11 victims, enforced through wage garnishment during any future employment, asset seizure where applicable, and mandatory financial reporting as a condition of his probation. I want to be honest with you about restitution because Hollywood makes it look like a check arrives the next week, and that's not how it works. Restitution orders are enforced over time, often years, particularly when the defendant has limited assets. In our case, Kane's truck, the same white pickup, was seized and sold, with proceeds applied to restitution. His remaining bank accounts, what little was left in them, were seized. And going forward, a percentage of any wages he earns is garnished directly toward the restitution balance for as long as it takes to pay it off, monitored by the probation office. As for me personally, between the seized asset proceeds distributed proportionally among victims and roughly 14 months of garnishment payments that have come in steadily since his release to a supervised work program, I have now recovered the full $30,000, every dollar, plus a small amount of statutory interest awarded as part of the judgment. Every single dollar. It took about 2 years total, start to finish, from the day I handed him that cashier's check to the day my restitution balance hit zero, but it happened. And the garage? We ended up hiring a properly licensed, properly insured contractor, one whose license number I verified myself on the state licensing board website before I signed anything, and whose insurance certificate I called the broker directly to confirm before a single dollar changed hands. The rebuild took 4 months, start to finish, done right, done legally, done with a real payment schedule tied to completed milestones rather than one enormous deposit up front.
I am, I'll admit, a different homeowner now than I was before the fire. I verify everything. I ask for license numbers before the first phone call ends. I call insurance brokers directly rather than trusting a PDF. I never pay more than a modest deposit and never without a milestone-based payment schedule in writing. Some of the other victims in our group have become close friends. We still check in, still occasionally spot other suspicious restoration company ads in local Facebook groups, and warn each other, and warn strangers before they become victim number 12, or 20, or 50. Because here's the thing that still sits with me. Russell Kane didn't start with me. Best estimates from the investigation suggest he'd been running some version of this scheme for close to 6 years before I ever met him, under at least 4 different business identities, targeting an unknown number of victims before ours who never reported, never connected the dots, or never had the resources to fight back the way we did collectively. So let me leave you with the warning signs, the ones I learned the hard way, so hopefully you never have to. 1. Verify the license yourself directly on your state's licensing board website every single time, no exceptions. Never accept a license number typed in a text message as proof of anything. Look it up yourself in real time before you sign anything. 2. Call the insurance broker directly to confirm any certificate of insurance a contractor provides. A PDF with a logo on it proves nothing. A phone call to the broker's actual office using a number you find independently rather than one provided by the contractor takes 5 minutes and can save you tens of thousands of dollars. 3. Know your state's deposit limits. Many states legally cap how much a contractor can request upfront, specifically because large upfront deposits are the mechanism of almost every contractor fraud scheme. If someone asks for 25%, 30%, half the project cost upfront with no escrow account and no milestone structure, that is a 5-alarm red flag, not a normal business practice. 4. Insist on a payment schedule tied to completed, verifiable phases of work: framing complete, rough electrical past inspection, drywall complete, rather than a single deposit and a single final payment. This protects you at every stage, and it's also, frankly, how legitimate, established contractors typically prefer to operate anyway, because it protects them too. 5. Be suspicious of urgency. "I need this deposit by Friday or you lose your spot on my schedule" is a manipulation tactic as old as fraud itself. A legitimate contractor with a genuinely full schedule will still let you take a weekend to review a contract. 6. Check for a permit filing yourself directly with your town or county, rather than trusting your contractor's word about permit status. This is public information. It takes one phone call. And finally, if you ever discover you've been defrauded like this, document everything in writing immediately. File a police report even if you feel embarrassed. File with your state's Consumer Protection Division and Licensing Board simultaneously. And consider going public, carefully and factually, because the person who did this to you almost certainly did it to someone else too. And finding those other victims is very often what turns an unenforceable civil headache into a real prosecutable criminal case with restitution teeth behind it. I got my $30,000. All 11 of us eventually got restitution ordered in full, even if collection is still an ongoing years-long process for some of the group. Russell Kane got a felony conviction, incarceration, probation, and a permanent record that will follow him if he ever tries to pull this again under some new business name. He thought vulnerable homeowners rebuilding after disasters were easy, forgettable targets who'd never fight back. He was wrong. If this story resonated with you, or if you've been through something similar, a contractor, a scammer, anyone who took advantage of you financially and thought they'd get away with it, I want to hear about it. Tell me what happened in the comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we've got a lot more of these stories coming, and every single one of them ends the same way, with the person who thought they got away with it finding out they didn't. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.